So I'll repeat that part. I was going to say, what you're about to see is basically like a family photo slideshow from a family vacation. We're going to tell the story as we experienced the Colorado Basin. And the part that I think we'll focus less on is going to be the strategic insights we gained about how to work with different landscapes, like these great conversations we had in Paonia and Carbondale and Cortez and in Superior and in Mexicali. We'll touch on some of that, but I really feel like today it's more like I want to try and convey the experience. And I want to try to convey the experience in a way that Penny and Benji and I are still finding ways to give words to. Just what does it really feel like to travel where your travel companion is a hydrological system? Notice I'm not just saying a river. It's the full hydrological system that created the snowpack in the mountains, that created the various diverse rivers, that built up the infrastructure of dams and canals, the perverse economic processes that create alfalfa and other things grown in the desert in Southern California and Southern Arizona, to be sure that California doesn't get Arizona's water and Mexico doesn't get California or Arizona's water, to be sure all that hay is sold to Saudi Arabia or China. So there's a whole web of context that I will probably not be giving about how messy and atrocious the Colorado River system is as a management system. But I just want to set the context that it is the most controlled river system on Earth. I don't know if it's the most damaged, because you'd have to decide how you're measuring damage. But to have a river that's producing as much water as I will show you pictures of up in the headwaters, and how little water there was in the desert by the time we got down south, and how little water was in Lake Powell or Lake Mead, I would say it's not a very healthy system. And the other thing that I want to really convey, which I think the pictures will do a beautiful job of, is that these are sacred, incredible landscapes. Some of the most beautiful on Earth. People come from all over the world to fall in love with Canyonlands and the Grand Canyon and the Rocky Mountain National Park and just on and on. These are truly incredible landscapes. We even saw Joshua trees, although we weren't in Joshua Tree National Park. We were really close to there, basically tracking the Arizona border in Southern California. And so I'm going to be going back and forth between photos that I took and Google Earth images to help you see larger landscapes for context. And that's the basic idea. And what I think you're going to see is that we are practicing different kinds of pedagogy, like different ways of learning that we think are really, really powerful. And so I don't even want to wait. I'm just going to jump right in. So let's just get going. And I'm on my new computer, so hopefully it doesn't crash when I start this. Yay, it seems to be working. Oh wait, except I have to make this go away so I can't see it. There we go. All right, so first things first. I'm calling today's talk the Activating the Colorado River Basin. Notice when I'm not activating humans. I'm not activating human communities. When we talk about bioregional activations here in the design school, we tend to talk about them like we're activating the Cleveland area or we're activating Rochester. I would say this trip has an explicitly different purpose, which is that Penny, Benji, and I wanted to activate a spiritual relationship with the Colorado River Basin. And we hoped it would be contagious to the humans that we met along the way. And so you'll see how that works as we go. This is a photo that I took on the trip of Horseshoe Bend, which is just below Glen Canyon Dam in Page, Arizona. Little side note, Page, Arizona was founded in 1957 because it's where the construction crews came to build Glen Canyon Dam. That's the reason the town is there. And so that'll just give you a feel that we'll be touching on some cultural history of the infrastructure projects that helped to build the West while they're destroying the West. There'll be a parallel set of stories as we go. But let's just jump into the family slideshow. So first thing I want to say is, just so everyone knows, this is the Colorado River Basin. It has an upper basin and a lower basin with Lee's Ferry, which this guy Lee was one of the most disgusting Mormons in history. He led the murder of 77 women, children, and later was given the capital punishment from the US government. And now we still name Lee's Ferry after him. And the boundary between the upper and the lower basin has nothing to do with hydrology and everything to do with politics. Basically, all of the water above Lee's Ferry is basically for California, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. And all of the water below is for Arizona, New Mexico, and Mexico. And there's a lot more water above than below because most of the water comes from the snowpack of the Rocky Mountains. And there's more of it in Colorado than New Mexico. So it's important to know that the upper basin and the lower basin, these two different colors of landscapes, are actually defined by politics, not by ecology, geology, or hydrology. It's who gets the rights to claim that water. So even this map is colored based on people claiming water to take from the landscape. It just shows how entrenched the thinking is that the maps themselves are defined this way. So we really went on this journey to seed the dream of regenerating this basin, which people basically thought was insane until we told them a little bit about how we might go about doing it. We seeded the dream in lots of places. Now, these dots are not all of the places we actually went, but there are many of them. I'll show you a map with all the places we actually went in a moment. But the idea was that we would travel around visiting different communities and talk about what it means to regenerate the Colorado Basin and then weave together those conversations so that the communities would see each other as part of this larger system that they literally really are part of, even though they may not know it. Some of them do, some of them don't. And that we would plant the idea of there being a summit in the headwaters to gather people throughout the basin to come up to the headwaters and explore what it means to regenerate the Colorado Basin. So we traveled around with this revolutionary agenda, and we were very well received everywhere we went. This is a map of some of the places that we went in the upper basin. We went up to Granby, which is up by the birthplace of the Colorado River itself. Then we went to Paonia and then Carbondale, even though they're farther apart, just because Carbondale and Paonia had different restrictions on which days they could host us. And then we went to Grand Junction, to the Colorado National Monument, down to Canyonlands, to Cortez. So we started moving away from the headwaters, although Cortez is connected with the San Juan River, which is one of the headwaters of the Colorado Basin that drains into Lake Powell. And then we continued down to Horseshoe Bend and Glen Canyon Dam, to the Grand Canyon, to Hoover Dam and Lake Mead. We went and visited the insanity of the Las Vegas Strip to have a contrast of the health of landscapes and the unhealth of consumer culture. And then we finished the trip by going to Mexicali in Baja California, and then over to Superior, Arizona, which is connected with the Queens Creek Basin, or Queens Creek watershed, which drains into the Gila River, and the Gila River should drain. You'll see that it barely does when I show you pictures. Should drain into the Colorado River just before the border with Mexico. And so we traveled through this entire basin. And what's interesting is when you look at it from the top, this is a view of the birthplace of the Colorado River. And what you're seeing is mountains that are part of the Rocky Mountain National Park area. This is basically directly above Boulder. So Boulder, Colorado's on the west. Right now, we're actually looking toward the southeast, the way that I angled this image. And by the way, there was massive snowfall this year, massive runoff, and most of the rivers were at really high volumes. And so we're going to be showing you some of that in a moment. But I just wanted you to feel the shape of the Colorado River itself, where it's born is right here. So if you look at it without the coloration, this is the beginning of the river. It's actually to the left is north and to the right is south. So the river is initially running south. And as you go a mere 10 miles, you run into your first two lakes that have dams on them. There's Grand Lake and Granby Lake. And also, this place where a river is born is where the first infrastructure project was done on the Colorado River, where a 14-mile tunnel was dug to drain water across from west to east, across the Continental Divide, to dump the water into Boulder Creek to bring water to Boulder. And so the very first infrastructure project on the Colorado Basin is at the birthplace of the river to move water to the arid landscapes, the semi-desert landscapes of the Great Plains in the Front Range. And so there's actually water siphoned away in tubes under the mountains and dams all within the first 10 miles of the river. Just to give you a feel, this is a heavily, heavily controlled river or river system. And so we went there, and Benji had some problems with his knee, so he stayed behind. Penny and I hiked through this area. You can actually hike all the way to the summit. This is inside of Rocky Mountain National Park. And we were there in late May, when the snow melt was pretty much like full tilt. And what you can see is there's little pockets of snow, and there's water running everywhere. And I mean everywhere, from every direction. It's like the water started flowing through the forest. There was so much of it. You can't even tell which direction the water's coming from. It's not because of the angle of this photograph. It's because the water is coming from everywhere. It's all going in the same direction. It's all flowing downhill into the basin, but it's coming from everywhere. And there's something truly magical about going to the top of a mountain and feeling water, golden water shimmering in the sunlight that's just moving everywhere. And so we collected a gift offering of water. What I want you to notice is even at the headwaters, the Colorado River, which is famous for its salt and silt, had these sediments in the water at the very top. And so these salty sediments that are collecting in the bottoms of all of the lakes throughout the whole Colorado system can be found at the very top. This is water that we took as a gift offering to Mexicali to take to the Sea of Cortez. And Penny actually selected the place to collect this to get little fine sediments of sand that were sparkling like gold, because there is gold in these mountains. So we don't know if there was actually gold in that little pool of sand, but we gathered some things that looked like gold. And so just to give you a sense of the mineral riches, what are there, like 2,000 mines that have been built in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado alone? I think Benji knows the actual number, but basically huge numbers of mines that have just dug holes throughout the mountains of Colorado. Colorado is one of the biggest mining extraction states, certainly in the West, maybe in the United States, including in these beautiful environments. This is a view of the river about 10 miles down. This is the water as it runs into Grand Lake. So as the water arrives to the first of the lakes, look at how it's gushing. There's so much water. So this is the North Fork of the Colorado River. The North and South Forks are basically right next to each other on a little 10-mile stretch. They were at the very top of this river system. And one thing that struck us in the personality of the Colorado River is that the water is running. This is a river that is restless. The Colorado River is powerful, even when it's relatively small. You would, like, if you waded out into this, you might get swept off your feet, and the water may only be thigh deep here. It's like the water is just, there's so much inclination, so much elevation drop from the 13,000 feet elevation at the top to sea level at the bottom, that the river is just running out of the mountains. It's so powerful, such a characteristic of this river system. This is the Colorado River, just below Grand Lake and Granby Lake. So by this point, we're maybe 15 miles. The Colorado River itself, not all the other rivers, but the main line of the Colorado River is about 1,500 miles long. So here we're 15 miles in, and we've already passed 2 dams. And you can see the water is quite strong here. But in this whole area, there were massive wildfires a couple of years ago, 1 million acres or more, and hundreds of thousands to millions of acres, depending on how you define the geography, of dried out forest with dead trees from the Asian beetle infestation, which means the forests of the headwaters are sick. They're not well. Like, this is what it looked like as we're driving up that narrow valley to go in to see the birthplace of the Colorado River. It was dead forest as far as the eye could see in every direction. which was just astonishing to us, how symbolic it was that we arrived to this place with so much life, so much vitality, so much magic, and so much death and decay, and so much disease, all overlapping in the same place. Here's another view. This is driving toward the summit, toward the birthplace of the river, and just look at all those dead trees from a massive fire that burned through a couple of years ago. And so just imagine you go to Rocky Mountain National Park and you enter a scene like this. This is supposed to be one of the most beautiful places in North America to visit, and it is beautiful. And it's just a scene of destruction because of the wildfires and because of the diseases. And the diseases are from an invasive species from Asia. So just that globalization's influence is everywhere. And then as we're driving, we see things like this, these mining operations. And I wanted to capture the story of the river for myself. So when I saw something like this, I had to try and catch it. I took this picture from I-70 as we're going through Glenwood Springs Canyon, which is an incredible canyon. The Colorado River runs through with an interstate highway. And there are all of these mining operations and gravel pits just all over the place. Here's a view of the Colorado River after about 80 or 90 miles. See, it's gotten a lot bigger. And we're now in a wide open plain. We're near a town called Kremling at this point. And while you can't tell from this image, it looks like a peaceful river. That water is still running fast and it's really cold and it's all from snowmelt. And by this point, it's already been touched by at least 10 dams because of the little tributary streams even have dams on them up this high. And so the Colorado River is just something really, really spectacular and such a paradox. This is a little bit further down. This is Gore Canyon. And this is maybe about 100 miles from the birthplace of the river. And we're up pretty high above it. We're maybe 800 or 1,000 feet above the river looking down into this canyon. And what I want you to notice is that the Colorado River is a canyon maker at all elevations. It's building canyons up in the Rockies. It's building canyons in the area of the mesas and plateaus. It's building the Grand Canyon in Canyonlands. It's building Black Canyon in Arizona and California. It just is a canyon maker everywhere it goes. There's so much power in this river. And then the streams, like I said, it was a massive snow year. This is a little stream gushing that we saw probably, 50 or 60 streams like this as we were making this drive in the span of 2 days between the drainages into the Gunnison River and drainages into the Colorado River. Because at this point, we're driving from Kremling, where we stayed the night, we're driving over to Paonia, and we're taking a road that follows the Colorado River through the wild countryside, and we keep passing tributaries like this. There are hundreds of them. If you were to say, if I was to ask you, where does the Colorado River end and where does another river begin? The answer would be, it's the wrong question. That these creeks and streams and other rivers are part of the same river system, which was a big part of what we wanted to experience. Here we are in the Colorado River as it's heading down closer to where it's going to meet with the Gunnison River. At this point, we're actually south of Glenwood Springs. I'll show you on a map in a little bit where I'm talking about. You can see the landscape is becoming more desert-like because the Colorado River is coming out of the mountains, off the western slopes and into the desert area of western Colorado before it moves into Utah. And we drove up over the largest flat top mountain in the world to get to Paonia because there was a giant sinkhole that took out the highway between Carbondale and Paonia. So we drove up over this massive structure called Grand Mesa. And Grand Mesa still has snow on it, as you can see. So we drove up through this snowy area to drop down on the other side. And this is just to give you a sense of the tallest flat top mountain in the world. It's what you see in the bottom part of the image here. This is a scene from Google Earth where Paonia, which is on the North Fork of the Gunnison River, is on the right. Carbondale is at the top where the junction is for the Roaring Fork and the Crystal River, which then both drain to the left in this image to join the Colorado River, which you can see on the left. And then the Colorado River meets the Gunnison River down at the far left corner, far left bottom corner where Grand Junction is, that you can barely see in this image. And you can see how Grand Mesa, this giant volcanic structure, creates a huge shield that blocks erosion as erosion runs down beside it, going down more than 1,000 feet into the drainages below, a couple of thousand feet, I believe. And just to start to give you more of a feel that, like I said, you can't tell which one is the river, right? Which one of these threads is the river? And the answer is all of them, all of them. The Gunnison River, the Roaring Fork, the Colorado, they're all the same drainage system. They're just all draining from different parts of the mountain. As we drove up the North Fork of the Gunnison River, which was also at really high levels, as you can see in this image on the right, this is a picture we took from a place called Hotchkiss, which is really close to Paonia, which is one of the places you can see the Gunnison River, or the North Fork of the Gunnison River. Gunnison is one of the largest rivers to drain into the Colorado. You can see snowy mountain peaks in the distance, which is the source of all this water, is the snowmelt. And then we arrived at our friend Barb's house, and we had a beautiful home-cooked meal, veggies cooked into the soup from local farms, looking at permaculture projects. We started to feel some of the human element. The first people we met with were in Paonia. And there we are with our lovely Marta, who's here in the design school with us. Marta gave us a grocery bag of things so big that it completely filled our cooler. It kept trying to find ways to cram more canned fruit from the farms and produce that she had grown herself, that she was feeding us on as we hiked and camped our way through the deserts. But first, we got to Paonia and we started to hold council. The woman on the left with her hand on her cheek is Marissa, sitting that way because she's nearly ready to burst with pregnancy. And so she's a little tired. And then there's our friend Alex, animated, explaining things about the Recommon model and how to use community land trusts as an engine for regenerative economic development. And we're just like diving into strategies, diving into ways to fund projects, to form core teams, to do landscape management, to weave together and integrate local projects. And we're just having all this like dynamic conversations, weaving and flowing the same way the river does, all of them coming into a confluence with each other through our conversations. Which led to the first talk. So my first talk in the trip was in Paonia at the public library. Benji and Penny can tell you that when I said that we want to regenerate the Colorado River Basin, people looked at me like I was insane. Like, who is this crazy guy? And then after about 20 minutes, they were like, wow, that's really inspiring. And then 20 minutes later, they were like, wow, we have to do this. It was pretty awesome. We can talk more afterwards about how powerful these talks and these conversations were. But I just wanted to say that we were in Paonia knowing the next day we'd be in Carbondale. So we saw this as a time to prepare ourselves for the next conversation while also continuing previous conversations we'd had in Paonia before. And so as we started driving around Grand Mesa one more time, here we are on the Colorado River again, entering Glenwood Spring, which means we're getting close to Carbondale. So this is back on the Colorado River, driving over to the other side, where we were greeted by a council of women who hold spiritual communion to offer blessings to different processes, to provide grieving circles for people in their community, some really beautiful, powerful things. And they came together to bless our journey down the Colorado River. You might see Gwen there on the right in that pinkish orange shirt, and Lynn standing here on the left. Lisa, some of you may know, who's taking off her white sweatshirt here in the bottom left next to Penny. This is us being received in Carbondale and telling them about the spiritual nature of what it means to dream of regenerating the Colorado River. And Gwen is awesome. We were so happy to see each other. So Gwen really does know how to host a conversation, as does Lynn. And so this was us in the morning. Then we went up and did a hike looking down over the town of Carbondale with the magical Mount Sopris in the distance. This is the spiritual being of the indigenous people, the Ute people who lived in this area. before they were displaced by settlers. They considered that mountain, and they still consider that mountain to be a sacred being. All of the young people, all the newcomers, the settler culture people who feel connected to nature form a sacred bond with Mount Sopris as well. It's such a magical mountain. This is a picture to give you a view of two things. One is, if you look closely, you can see in the bottom of the image is the Roaring Fork River, and on the right, it comes into a confluence with the Crystal River. So from there on the right, you can follow the other river up, following the hillside. The Crystal River moves up toward Mount Sopris. So this is the confluence of two minor tributaries of the Colorado River Basin. And this is the basin, this is the watershed that includes Carbondale and Aspen, which is pretty famous. And you might notice the guy in the black shirt on the left, for those of you who know him, because that's our dear friend Bennett, who's here in the design school. Bennett joined us in Paonia and Carbondale and traveled with us down to Grand Junction. And then later gave Benji a ride back to Denver for some recuperation, which is a later part of the story. As we stood up here looking down over the rivers, Lynn and Gwen wanted to have us select a card and do a reading to offer a blessing to our trip. And it turned out that the reading we were given was that we are the kin of the red-tailed hawk. And the story of the red-tailed hawk says that our spiritual preparation has prepared us for this journey, and that we're more prepared than we know, and that the role of the red hawk is to fly high in the sky, far above everyone else, and with its keen eyesight, discern what is real, and then, like acupuncture, dive down into the landscape to touch the most strategic places where actions can be taken with what is real. And that this is a symbolic narrative to describe the journey of our trip down the Colorado River. Seems pretty appropriate, doesn't it? I think so. So then we were taken on this tour of Kaufman Ranch, which is this huge ranch. What was it, 1,100 acres? It says here on the sign. But basically, the Kaufman Ranch is a project of the Aspen Valley Land Trust. And we were shown this incredible map where all of the red land that you see is private farmland with conservation easements on it. All of the green land is public land, like national forest and similar. And then the other land is urban land or private land that's not being conserved. And you can see that they're doing landscape level planning. They're doing integrative work around biological corridors, conservation, all kinds of things. And this Kaufman Ranch was just this beautiful blend of regenerative agriculture together with learning center, together with connecting to high schoolers, together with community land trusts and alternative economic and financial models, all blended into one. And it's right on the edge of the town of Carbondale. So it's things like this that really show us how powerfully organizing is already underway, that even more powerfully integrated landscape management can be done in a place like this. So as we're standing on this land with this incredibly buff farmer, you see there on the left, who actually by training is an elementary school teacher, who later went on to become a sustainability expert, then a farmer, then a regenerative farmer, and I would wager a bodybuilder too by his strength. Super sweet guy. You could tell he's great with kids, really passionate about education, and pretty darn hard worker on the land. And here we are all standing together talking about bioregional learning centers, regenerative education, integrated landscape management, and all kinds of really cool things in preparation for a strategy meeting that we had afterwards with Gwen and Lynn about how the design school could help them to try to build funding packages and narratives to bring funding and collaboration to their landscapes based on what we were seeing. And so this was a big part of the work that we were doing when we were there. Here's a picture from Kaufman Ranch. This is part of the Roaring Fork River. So this is a minor tributary of the Colorado Basin, and it's a pretty big river itself. And it's just beautiful, isn't it? The rivers way up in the mountains are just gorgeous. And just wanted you to see Lynn, beautiful Lynn, with Gwen standing next to her. They were so dynamic and such wonderful hosts, receiving us and sending us on our way with blessings. And speaking of blessings, as we left, we went over to the Crystal River. This is the Crystal River on the right, with our lovely friend Rita Marsh, And here is Rita holding a jar for us to collect water to take to the Sea of Cortez. And so we collected some water to accompany the water from the headwaters of the Colorado River and some other water we had collected from the Barichara River here in Colombia before leaving on our trip, which we took to offer ceremony on the tribal Kukapa lands when we got to Mexicali. But I don't want to jump ahead. That's a later part of the story. Every one of the major confluences that we went to, I felt the need to offer a tobacco ceremony. So the first time I did this was at the confluence of the Colorado River and the Gunnison River at Grand Junction. By the way, it's called Grand Junction because the Colorado River used to be called the Grand River, and then later they renamed it. So this was the junction of the Grand and the Gunnison, which is why the town is called Grand Junction. And what I want you to notice here is that there were placards and signs everywhere we went. We're getting this bioregional education just by visiting sites like the community park that was here at the confluence. And by the way, this is the second largest confluence of the whole system. The Gunnison River is the second largest tributary of the Colorado, with the Green River being the largest. We'll get to the Green River in a moment. But first, when we're in Grand Junction, we were invited to go to a United Church of Christ and give a talk. And boy, did the members of this church community have no idea what they were getting into. They show up thinking, oh, we care about the environment, we'll hear this talk. The same pattern repeated, absolute incredulity, this guy's insane, there's no way you could regenerate the river, to, oh my God, we have to do that. And we're so proud of all the projects we're already doing, and we really want to be a part of this. That's Penny sitting next to her dear friend Camila, who's the woman that invited us to come. And Penny and I stayed with her. Actually, Benji stayed with her as well. I'm getting ahead. Benji and Bennett, who are in the back right, left us to go to Denver the next day. They stayed with us for this part. Now I just wanted you to see a little bit of Grand Junction. Just to orient you, from Grand Junction at the top, up and to the left is the Colorado River, over and to the right is the Gunnison River, and just look at how much agriculture they cram into this desert landscape by siphoning the water off of the Colorado River. This is a common thing you'll see in Arizona and California as well. Even when you have extreme desert, you'll have this patchwork of farmland because of surface water irrigation with canals and electrical pumping stations to pump the water to all the agriculture. You can see a little bit of it here, because this is when we were at the Colorado National Monument, looking down on the town of Fruta, which is a suburb of Grand Junction. And all of that water you see, almost all of it, is actually lagoons or reservoirs. I don't know if you can see it in the middle of the image, but there's a little brown thread. That is, the brown thread is the Colorado River. The blue water is all of the water they've pulled out with canals to reserve for agriculture. They're just pulling water out continuously to maintain the flow of water through a canal system for the agriculture in this desert landscape. This is a theme that continues for the rest of the journey. One thing that is dominant in any desert landscape is that you can see evidence of water everywhere, and you can see the presence of water nowhere. As we looked out into the Colorado National Monument, where water has carved these huge monument structures of rocks with 1,000 to 2,000 foot deep canyons, all of this draining into the Colorado River, it's important to remember that all of these mesas are part of the Colorado River system too. All of these dry canyons are part of the Colorado River. All of them, including this one. So most of us would look at something like this, see that dry wash, that sandy bed of river, and we wouldn't think of that as part of the Colorado River system, but it is, because when it does rain, this water drains into the Colorado just below those rocks. So then Benji and Bennett drove to Denver because Benji needed to rest and because he had some health issues he was dealing with, and his sister was about to pop in late stage pregnancy, and he thought he might catch the baby being born. That didn't happen until later, but the baby was born eventually. But we parted ways, and Penny and I went on to some of the most sacred sites in the whole trip. This is a place called Island in the Sky. It's in Canyonlands National Park, just outside of Moab in the Utah desert. And everything you see in front of you is carved by the Colorado River. We got there at sunrise. We went to a sacred spot where there's this arch called the Mesa Arch, which is the arch that lets you sit on top of a mesa and see the canyonlands below. People come from all over the world to experience the spiritual power of this place. And indigenous people have come to this place for thousands of years for exactly the same reason. It's a powerful, powerful landscape. Looking down into the land, you can see why it's called Canyonlands. And everything down here, from the center to the left is the Colorado River, from the center to the right is the Green River, and the confluence of those two rivers is hidden in a labyrinth of canyons. This is a relief map or a diorama at the Visitor Center, where you can see how the Green River on the left, the Colorado River on the right, form the Canyonland system. And these raised structures, the raised rock in the middle at the top, is where we're standing at Island in the Sky. And I was really happy to see at the Visitor Center that they had a plaque with a list of the names of all of the tribes of indigenous people who consider this to be sacred lands. It's not just the Ute people, it's also the Navajo, it's the Paiute, it's on and on. Just look at that list. The Pueblos of Taos, the Pueblos of Zuni, right? The Ute Mountain people, on and on. There's so many people who consider, you can even see Moapa, which is the root name for Moab, Kaibab, which is a common name for some of the trails, and Kaibab National Forest in Arizona, named after this group of Paiute people. All of them consider this to be sacred land, and I must say, Penny, Benji, and I consider it sacred land too. Penny and I, who were alone together on this part of the journey, we just felt the magnificence of these landscapes. We viewed the Green River only twice. This is the Green River from Island in the Sky. And just look at how powerful it is. The Green River starts in Wyoming, up in the Rocky Mountains to the north, and then makes its way through Wyoming into Utah and joins the Colorado here. When Penny and I looked out onto this, it's sort of hard to describe how breathtakingly beautiful it is. To imagine that the Colorado River system has been turned into pipes and bathtubs for storing water and drying out landscapes, and then look down into a landscape as magnificent as this, it's hard not to feel a spiritual connection. And that was one of the things we wanted to really enliven in ourselves. But it's interesting when you see propaganda like this. This is the sign at the confluence, at the overlook of the Green River, where it says the Green and Colorado rivers join deep in the distant canyons. The confluence was unknown, quote, unknown, until John Wesley Powell mapped the area in 1869. Now, do you think that the indigenous people did not know about this confluence for the at least 14,000 years before 1869? Seems sketchy. It's so interesting to read these historical accounts from Westerners, to value the importance of them. John Wesley Powell is a major figure in the story of the Green River and the Colorado River. John Wesley Powell tried to advocate that all of the water west of the Mississippi, that actually the new states, be organized around watersheds. Think about it. He had a bioregional point of view. So it's not that John Wesley Powell is a bad guy. It's that the United States loves to erase real history, that the indigenous people were kicked out of this land and that the white settlers claimed it, and that at the national parks, they still tell that story to this day. So the abuse of the river is spiritual as much as it is hydrological. This is a view of the Colorado River from a place called Dead Horse State Park, which is really close to Moab. And just look at the canyons that are carved by this. We're well over 1,000 feet above the river, maybe closer to 2,000 feet above the river. So the river's really big at this point. We haven't gotten to Glen Canyon Dam yet, where a lot of the water is stopped, but we'll get there soon. And just look at how magnificent that river is. When Penny saw the river from Dead Horse State Park, she felt like she had to go see the river. She'd already started calling her Mamacita, the mother of the landscapes. She's like, I have to go see Mamacita. I have to touch her. So as we went down into Moab, we found a place right next to the river where this huge river is just pouring past us. I don't know if you can see it, but the shape of the ripples in the water is upwelling, which means the water is in a full turbulent flow, churning as it rolls because the water is moving so quickly. And this water is several hundred feet across from one side to the other. You can't properly get the size of the river at this point. Penny and I went and camped down near the town of Monticello and got up super early the next morning to arrive at the Needles area in the lower part of Canyonlands to hike out to the confluence of the Green River and the Colorado River. It's a 10.2 mile round trip hike, really hot and fully exposed. And not only is this a record year for snowpack and the amount of rain that's running off, but people in the area, Heidi, who's on this call, could tell you because she's from an area pretty close to here, the wildflowers this year are incredible. Everywhere we went, the people who hike said that they have not seen wildflowers like this in 20 years. So we arrived to a magical landscape during a magical moment. We're in the middle of Canyonlands surrounded by painted deserts of flowers. It was just incredible. This is just another view of the Needles area to give you a little feel for it. These are all petrified sand dunes from an ancient seabed that has later been carved by erosion. And do you remember that red hawk card that we picked up in Carbondale? Well, I picked up a red hawk feather while we were hiking to the confluence, the most sacred moment in the whole trip for Penny and me. So we felt like we had spirit guides with us as we traveled. And this is a part that's maybe a little more personal. Just want to share that I'm on my own shamanic journey of feeling into my own medicine and finding ways to bring it into the world. So it felt really powerful for me to bring tobacco, a symbol of peace, especially peace among men and honoring their ancestors. That comes from South America because tobacco is originally from the Northern Andes. I brought tobacco from Barichara, and I offered blessings to the confluence of the Green River and the Colorado River, which looks like this. Now we're about 1,500 feet above the water here. If you step out to that edge and slip, you will die because it's about an 800-foot drop to the rocky slope below. So this is where these two rivers come together in this isolated, barren, and remote landscape. But notice, even with the intensity of desert, there are lines of trees along the shores of the rivers, deep in these 2,000-foot deep canyons. It's starting to look more like the Grand Canyon now. It's giving a feel of a massively important history. These canyons took 5 million years to dig, and they were dug equally by the Green River and the Colorado River. It would be hard to say which is more important, the Colorado or the Green, because they're the same river. They're the same river. They both carved the same canyon system together, and this is the place where they joined forces. And these two rivers have become one for 5 million years in exactly this location. This is just to give you a little feel for how you can see Canyonlands National Park up above in the left. And what you see in this line down in the lower part from the bottom right toward the left is the San Juan River, which is a major tributary of the Colorado River system. And you can see Cortez over here on the right, which drains into the San Juan River. And you can see that yet again, there's this transition from green, mountainous area to the east and desert to the west. And when we went to Cortez, that's where we got to hang out with Heidi. Hi, Heidi. I know she's here on the call with us. Heidi actually came to us through our friend Anna, because Heidi's active in Pro-Social World, which means we have more than one way of weaving networks. Heidi, just so you know, after this session today, I'm going to talk with members of Pro-Social World who have been actively building relationships throughout Latin America for a year. And we're going to talk about educating children and regeneration of landscapes, focusing on children by spreading Pro-Social World across Latin America. Not that different from what we're doing in the Colorado Basin. And so Heidi is a wonderful person. She hosted us to share her vision of turning the land that she's living on, that she and her husband recently purchased with their two boys. They live in Durango, but they bought this land in Cortez, and they want it to be an ecological learning and retreat center. And there are men like this lovely guy, it's Stephen, isn't it? Who's on the right, who has been a farmer all of his life from Cortez. You might say he's a simple farmer who doesn't talk very much. He's kind of a quiet listener, but you can feel the depth of his intuition and his land connection after a lifetime of farming. Just how much pragmatic knowledge and patience and humility comes with farming in these difficult landscapes. Now, one of the reasons that the visit to Cortez was so powerful is because there's this creek that runs across the land where Heidi lives that drains through part of the Navajo land and into, eventually, if I understand it correctly, the Dolores River and then the San Juan River, and that they have about 3 hectares of land that they can protect and restore the native ecology, and then create a native ecology learning space along this stream. It's actually very rare for someone to have access to directly to the stream bed the way that Heidi and her family do. And she, being a person who studied climate change and aquatic systems for all of her professional life, really understands the importance of these riparian zones. And so this was just another community where all of the people there were really awesome, with really diverse and complementary skill sets, with a lot of capacity to regenerate their landscapes that could join a network of other landscapes within the Colorado Basin. And so one of the really fun things is, this just to give you a little bit more feel for why you guys are going to want to be friends with Heidi, is look at all those board games. One of the things that Heidi is really focused on, because she understands humans, is that we need places to hang out and play and get to know each other, and that we need to build deep familial bonds with each other. So we were talking about the use of these, this is a trailer home that's been converted into a living space, because she's done a lot of work with research field stations and sees how her land could become a research field station for people from around the world to come and learn about these climatic and ecological systems. And that means you got to have fun and you got to have community. And so that was one of the things we talked about while we were hanging out with the folks in Cortez. But, you know, as we left Cortez, it was really telling that we go on to the Ute Reservation. How can you tell? Because there's a Ute casino. Because this is basically the trademark of reservations in the United States, is that they're places for mafia to make deals with indigenous people on marginal lands. And then we drove on into the Dene, or the Navajo Nation. And I just want you to notice this image on the, well, first on the left, there's graffiti on the sign for the Navajo Nation, which says that the Navajo Nation is a place filled with cultural trauma. Because not only did someone deface this sign, but also it wasn't cleaned up afterwards. You can feel the absence of pride in this sign. And on the right, you can see another form of deep impoverishment and trauma, which is how dry and desolate and impoverished the landscape is. The Navajo people were pushed onto some horribly marginal lands where they struggled to survive. The Ute people in the same way, which is why the Navajo and the Ute tend to not want to collaborate with Westerners. They have good reasons not to trust the people from the dominator culture. But as we drove through this landscape, we'd also see things like this: harsh desert, but still riparian zones, lush and green, wherever there happens to be water. Which means if we could get water to flow and get water to stay in the river systems, it could actually regenerate the landscapes. And if we regenerate the vegetative cover on the landscapes, we can restore the river systems, which is a lesson everywhere on Earth. So of course it applies here. At this point, we've actually entered northeastern Arizona. We've left Utah and Colorado, but it's a pretty similar landscape. And that brings us back to Page, the town in Arizona established in 1957 to create the Glen Canyon Dam, where the famous Horseshoe Bend is. I want you to notice how the water is green and clear. Green because of all of the agricultural runoff, the nitrogen fertilizer, creating algae blooms, which is making all that green crud that's in it. And clear because this is just below Glen Canyon Dam, where all of the sediment and the silt is sitting in the bottom of Lake Powell. And that they're releasing the water from the bottom of the dam, but the water has had a chance to settle and sit in this huge reservoir, allowing the salty sediments to build up throughout Glen Canyon, this absolutely beautiful landscape above the dam. So this is Glen Canyon Dam, completed in 1967. which corresponds with the end of the time that water arrives to the delta in the Sea of Cortez. Water has only arrived to the delta of the Sea of Cortez twice since Glen Canyon Dam was built, because there were 2 times where there was such massive flooding, or that there were agreements to release water for policy reasons that they allowed water to run to the Sea of Cortez, because normally they don't. Now, I just want you to see Lake Powell, one of the largest artificial lakes in North America, and look how low it is. They had to move the marina and all of the boats out to the middle. Those white rocks are bleached from having been under the lake since 1967, or as the lake filled. And just look how low Lake Powell is. Lake Powell is sort of the textbook case of a mega drought. 30 years of reduced rainfall, climate change having its tolls, but also the management of this river system having its tolls and drying out landscapes. Now, granted, if the dam wasn't there, this lake wouldn't be there, but this is the holding tank for future water to places like Los Angeles, Phoenix, Tucson, and San Diego. So it's really a big deal that this lake is so low. As we traveled onward to move toward the Grand Canyon, there's a beautiful stop we did in southern Utah that I don't have time to share right now. But this is the Little Colorado River that drains into the main Colorado River just before the Grand Canyon. So now we're pretty close to Flagstaff in northern, kind of north central Arizona. And we get to one of the most magnificent places on Earth. I just want to stress that the Grand Canyon exemplifies a major insight and thing we need to keep in mind about the Colorado River, which is the Colorado River produces some of the most beloved landscapes on Earth. People come from all over the world to see the Grand Canyon because it is freaking amazing. This is the only place on Earth where you can see rocks that are more than 1 billion years old in their natural setting, because the Grand Canyon is carved all the way down into the center of a continent to rocks that are 1.2 billion years old at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And if you hike or ride a mule down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, you can touch continental rocks more than 1 billion years old. This landscape is of extreme importance for spiritual reasons and for scientific reasons, and it's just damn beautiful. You know, when you start to look at the Grand Canyon, your eyes eventually sort of glaze over because it's too much to take in. Anyone who's been there knows what I'm talking about. But if you look at this picture in the very, very center, there's a tiny green speck, which is the Colorado River way down at the bottom of it. There are very few places from the south rim of the Colorado River where you can really see the river because it's so deep and so far away and the canyon's so big. So again, we went to a museum and visitor center and we learned more about the history and the geology. There's Penny looking at this diorama of the Grand Canyon. And as we're taking all of this in, we're reading the story of how the Colorado River is managed, including the story of the most infamous part, Hoover Dam. So this is Hoover Dam. One thing I didn't know about Hoover Dam or Glen Canyon Dam is I thought that the electricity was being produced to power the cities. Now, granted, it produces enough electricity that it does partially power the cities, but a lot of this power is for the pumping stations, for the pipes and canals to pump this water over mountains, through deserts to Los Angeles. And so Hoover Dam, which was built in the 1930s during the Great Depression, is one of those classical cases of the most horrible kinds of labor, like I would just say of harsh labor situations. More than 1,000 construction workers died horrible deaths while building Hoover Dam, which is why it was so disgusting to see them celebrating these workers and saying nothing about how horrible their lives were. And they were only there because of the absolute desperation. The mafia corporate bosses could just, like, if one of these guys died from asphyxiation while they were digging a tunnel, asphyxiation has the beautiful benefit of not showing scarring tissue in the heart or lungs, which means that they can call it accidental death And then they don't have to pay workers' compensation to the families. So the companies that built Hoover Dam were as horrible as mafia bosses can be. And so the propaganda at Hoover Dam, when you know the real history, was just disgusting. It was this celebration of engineering excellence and brilliance and cleverness and heroism, when it was actually exploitation of desperate people, including killing them pretty violently in their work conditions, and the destruction of sacred landscapes. And this is Lake Mead. When you stand on Hoover Dam right now, you can see how low the water is, hundreds of feet below. I think it's about 600 feet below its level. And when you think of how large this reservoir is, 600 feet of depth is millions and actually it's trillions and trillions of liters of water. So just for reference, Lake Powell, where Glen Canyon Dam is a backup reservoir to refill Lake Mead, to be sure Lake Mead can deliver water to California for California's allotments. And so when Lake Powell is low, Lake Mead can't be recharged. And now Lake Mead is low and Lake Powell is really low, which is why there's so much stress around water issues for the Colorado River. And downstream from the Hoover Dam is the Black Canyon area, which is absolutely gorgeous. But then you go a few miles away to Las Vegas, and inside of a palatial hotel called the Bellagio, you'll see this celebration of artificial nature. And you'll see slot machines. And Penny and Benji and I felt the need to go and sit in the insanity of this. Benji rejoined us in Las Vegas, flew out from Denver, and we went and spent an afternoon and evening in Las Vegas and got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to drive to Mexicali to remind ourselves the juxtaposition of what this insane water management system is actually supporting. Is it supporting a highly unsustainable consumer culture based on wealth, opulence, mythology, absolute fantasy, and insanity? So, moving downstream, doesn't the Colorado River look more tame? This is the Colorado River closer to Lake Havasu. We're now actually in California, on the California side, whereas over on the other side of the river is the Arizona side. And you can see the water is relatively clear after all of the dams. It's got that green algae from all of the agricultural runoff. And Penny is standing there feeling the river. We're trying to relate to this river as a person as we traveled. And we're looking at its smooth flow. We're looking at the clear water. We're looking at the nitrogen loading and the unhealthy aquatic ecosystems. And we're feeling how much this system has been tamed, how much it's been domesticated, how much it's been dominated and controlled, including diverting a lot of the water into barren desert landscapes with massive canal systems like this one, which we saw all over Southern California, with green fields growing hay to feed to cattle in China and Saudi Arabia, to meet agreements for Arizona and California to pay off debts on infrastructure projects, to build dams like the Hoover Dam, the Parker Dam, and the Glen Canyon Dam. I just want you to notice this scene here, where you can see the obviously irrigated land and the barren desert landscape at the edge of it that they're not irrigating. This landscape, this is the Mojave Desert, one of the hottest and most intense deserts on Earth, and there's agriculture in it to meet water policy and economic development needs, not for food production, which is a really important point. There are a lot of subtleties to the actual reasons for why the land is managed the way that it is. And then you go like an hour, drive for an hour, and you are in sand dunes like you're in the Sahara. This is Southern California. Now think about it. We're getting really close to the Mexican border. Illegal immigrants, refugees from Mexico who enter the United States have to cross these sand dunes, which it's easy to patrol with drones and helicopters to capture those people and imprison them. It's also easy for those people to have heat exposure and die in landscapes like this. And these are the kinds of landscapes where they put open canals to divert water from the Colorado River to places like San Diego and Los Angeles. Just wanted you to see a picture of the alfalfa, the hay that's being grown to feed cattle in Saudi Arabia. In this particular place, this is the Imperial Valley in Southern California, connected to what's called the All-American Canal, which All-American means the canal is entirely in the United States because they actually kept the water from going to Mexico. And they grow grass in extreme desert to use the water that they're keeping from getting to Mexico, because in the West, the water law says you use it or lose it. If California does not use its water, someone else can lay a claim to it. So you end up with some pretty absurd land practices, like growing a water-intensive grass to feed cattle on another continent, to be sure California is using its water so that Arizona and Mexico don't lay claim to it. And I just wanted you to get a little feel for how much desert is around Mexicali in Mexico and what the delta of the Colorado River looks like. Notice that it's dry, sandy beds, that water actually doesn't get to the delta anymore. We arrived in Mexicali. We met up with Eduardo, who's there on the right, Eduardo Esparza, who's here in the design school. He immediately connected me with Oscar, who's the man on my right, and it's between Penny and me in this picture. Oscar is basically a media mogul, and the guy there on the right behind Eduardo is a journalist who's interviewing me for a national newspaper. I ended up in the national press and newspaper and television, and my presentation was given to at least hundreds of thousands of people in Mexico because of the power players that Eduardo knows in Mexicali. It's pretty amazing. So we'd arrived in Mexicali, and an hour later, I'm already starting to do interviews. And then we met with some of the wealthiest business owners and landowners who are all basically like mafia bosses, except that they're really keen to build a regenerative economy. So when we went over to Cetis University, which is where Eduardo did his undergraduate degree, and gave a talk, well, I'll get to that in a moment. I gave a talk that included a senator from Baja California, top people from government and business throughout all of Baja California, major media outlets, and representatives from environmental groups and indigenous groups that are ancestral to the area. And as you can see, I gave my talk in Spanish. Title was Aprendiendo Cómo Regenerar la Tierra, just learning how to regenerate the earth. And then another earth regenerator, Albert, who's from Tijuana, but now lives closer to San Diego, came down and joined us for this part of the trip. There's something really special about weaving members of the design school with the landscapes themselves, which in this case was mostly with Gwen and Lynn, with Marta, with Albert, with Bennett, with Eduardo, as we wove our way through this landscape. And then we brought in 2 new recruits so far, Chris from Superior, that you'll see in a moment, and Heidi, who's here on the call. We're weaving landscapes online and offline. And Albert just turned out to be super quirky, really fun, great sense of humor, really smart, nerdy guy. I just want to hug Albert again. He's so sweet. And so it was really great to have a Baja Californian who's in the design school that could come and help Eduardo, and is actually probably going to help him after we've left with some of the on-the-ground operations in Baja California. Albert studied oceanography once upon a time and is learning about landscape restoration now and regenerative finance and all kinds of other cool things. So it'll be good for him to be helping with the activations of Mexicali. Now we're actually getting close to the end of the slideshow because we're getting close to the last place that we went. But I just want you to see this is what Baja California and Mexicali looks like. That mountain there, that ridgeline in the distance, in front of it is where the Colorado River no longer runs to get to the Sea of Cortez. Now, we wanted to go to the Sea of Cortez and offer our blessings to the Sea of Cortez, but it turned out that the week before we arrived, the son of the governor of the indigenous Kukapa people was assassinated. And then the governor of the Kukapa people had an assassination attempt on his life by drug cartels. And the Kukapa did not feel it was safe for us to go into the Delta, which meant that we went to a wealthy person's private resort where they are holding the last of the water of the Colorado River. But this is on Kukapa land. It's on ancestral Kukapa land. This is very close to where the water just flows into sand and stops moving. And it's as large as it is because they've built a resort here and they're holding the water in a lagoon. So the last place you'll find any of the Colorado River is at a private resort where the Kukupah people are friends or employees of a wealthy rancher who owns probably 10,000 hectares of land. And we went to this place with the blessing of the Kukupah people to bring our gift offerings. The water from the Colorado River, the water from the Barichara River, the water from the Crystal River, different artifacts from different places along our journey. This woman in the middle is an elder from the Kukupah Nation, and she came to offer her blessings to the ceremony, to the ritual, because we made it very clear we were not holding ceremony, which is a community process. Here I was explaining to her what kind of ritual we were going to perform, and she was really approving. She seemed to really be curious. Who is this white guy with a little bit of suntan with a pirate bandana on his head who's about to do a ritual without an indigenous heritage? And so we set up a space. I smoked tobacco. Actually, Benji and I both smoked tobacco. And these are all objects gathered from different river systems throughout the Colorado Basin, which we offered to the water as a blessing from the children of Barichara and from the children of the headwaters of the Colorado. And while we did this, the indigenous people sat around chatting and just giving us space, holding a social container to welcome us while we were there. They kept a distance of about 20 feet. They sat over to the side and watched us with great curiosity, like who the hell are these people and what are they doing? And this is so fascinating. But at the same time, they were very welcoming and very supportive of us. And we felt very held and very much loved by them while we were performing our little ritual. And then we looked at a new 3-week-old regenerative agriculture project, growing a mesquite forest, mesquite, as they'd say in Mexico, which is a native tree that can be grown for various medicinal purposes and can be used for making materials, and something the indigenous people have used, and that also can grow in harsh environments and help to restore landscapes. So it looks pretty barren right now because they're just getting started. And I just want you to notice side by side, these two pictures are taken about 20 feet apart. Those are baby trees that have just been planted with the same model of canal systems for water with the dry parched earth right next to it. This is something really important. This is the All-American Canal that brings water from the junction of the Gila River and the Colorado River over through the Imperial Valley almost to San Diego. And I just wanted you to see that is a concrete channel with water in the open air flowing through extreme desert. That is not a mirage. It is really that insane. And that is, like I said, to be sure California gets its water rights before Mexico does. This is the All-American Canal that tracks the Mexico-America border to be sure the water does not get into Mexico. So not only do they keep Mexicans out of the United States, they keep US water out of Mexico. Now this is the junction of the Colorado River coming from the top of the picture down, and the Gila River coming from the right to the center. And then from the center going down toward the left is heading toward Mexicali. And you can see how they've grown agriculture in the desert landscapes along as much of the river as they possibly can. And because the Gila River used to be the largest river so the second largest river in the system after the Colorado is the Green River, the third largest is the Gunnison, and the fourth is the Gila, because the Gila River starts in the continental divide of New Mexico. But as we're approaching the Gila River, we see this. Canals pushing water along irrigation fields, and electrical pumps pumping the water up to those canals. This is the same canal where they've raised the water about 30 feet. And that water you see below, that is the Colorado River after the Gila River has joined it. Isn't it pathetic? So Benji and Penny and I almost got lost trying to find our way to the junction of the Gila River and the Colorado River. Notice how the water is stagnant and green from the agricultural runoff. And that right there, that channel that's about 20 feet across and maybe 6 or 7 feet deep is the Gila River joining the Colorado River. In the foreground is the Colorado River after the Gila has joined it, and in the background, the Gila is coming toward us to join it. It's pathetic. The third largest river to join the Colorado is a tiny stream, smaller than the gushing streams that we saw way up in the mountains at the top of this river system. This is at the bottom where all of the water should have been collected, and the Gila River is just pathetic. This is a picture we took just outside of Phoenix from the highway. This is the part of the Gila River before they've taken out more of its water. But what you can't see in this image is that outside of the scene where you see trees and water, 10 times wider on the right and the left are the boundaries of what the river used to be. So imagine you are seeing 5% of the horizontal distance from one end to the other of what used to be the width of the river for the Gila River. And now it's just a trickle of water because so much of it has been pulled out for Tucson and Phoenix and for agriculture along the way. But then we got to Superior, super cool town. There's Chris Casilla on the right, super cool guy. He said he'd join us today unless his wife went into labor. So I'm guessing he's not here because he's becoming a father right now. We'll find out if that's true or not later, but that's what he said he was going to do. His wife was 9 months pregnant. Chris is an amazing community organizer, super smart guy. He hosted us for the last talk that we gave, which was in Superior. This bald-headed guy on the right has worked with the Savory Institute, teaching biodynamic farming and holistic grazing, and is an expert in creating composting systems as an engineer. And that's his partner sitting next to him. And then we went and saw Queens Creek, which is sometimes called the Lost River of Arizona, because this is a canyon-making river that, as you can see now, is dry, even though the older people in the town will tell you that the water ran consistently until about 30 years ago. And as we hiked up and down this river, exploring ways to do landscape regeneration and watershed restoration, we went and visited a sacred site of the Apache people, a place called Oak Flats, where a mining company wants to mine a hole 7,000 feet deep to pull copper out and then have the shaft collapse on itself and destroy an entire sacred mountain of the Apache people. Obviously, the Apache people don't want that to happen, so they've been mobilizing resistance to it for about 15 years. And this is just a picture of us with Miracle, is this lovely woman down in the bottom. She took the selfie. That guy on the right is a guy traveling all over the world from Belgium. He does bike touring and long distance sailing to go climb to the summits of mountains all over the world. Super cool guy that we met. So you can see that my whirlwind tour is really to give you a feel for what it's like to travel from mountain to sea through the deserts and experience the complexity of this landscape. And I want to actually bring this presentation to a close with one thing that I learned as I was reading books and as we were traveling, which is this network of dams, the Glen Canyon Dam, Hoover Dam, Parker Dam, which creates Lake Havasu, and Imperial Dam, are actually connected to canal systems. Now, I'm going to show you some lines that are not where the canals are. It's just where the water goes. Is that from Lake Powell, they divert water through 300 miles of open desert through surface canals to bring water to Phoenix and Tucson. And they burn 20,000 pounds of coal in a power plant on the Navajo Nation to produce enough electricity to pump that water over the mountains. That also actually feeds the water supply to Flagstaff, which means that if Glen Canyon Dam went away, Flagstaff, Phoenix, and Tucson would go away. And then from Hoover Dam, Parker Dam, and Imperial Dam, they divert water through a massive network of canals to Los Angeles and San Diego to be sure Mexicali doesn't get it, which means there would be not nearly enough water for the populations of Los Angeles or San Diego if this infrastructure had not been built. And then the water that is released from the Glen Canyon Dam to Hoover Dam is the backflow storage of water for California, like I was saying before. So when we think about regenerating the Colorado River, that would mean dismantling these dams, and that would mean these population centers going away. Just to give you a sense of how profoundly difficult it is to imagine regenerating the Colorado River. And I just wanted to leave you with that idea that the Colorado River system has been treated as a giant machine the size of a major part of a continent, and it is destroying the landscape, drying it out and depleting it in a totally insane water management system that we experienced directly as we traveled. And so I hope this starts to give you a feeling for just how complex the Colorado River system is, because I just gave you a whirlwind tour for an hour. There's so much more. And by the way, there are other people who have studied the Colorado system for decades. John probably knows quite a bit about it. There's probably others who know. Heidi probably knows a lot about it. There are others who know a lot about it. But for us to just travel along this living landscape, this tapestry of landscapes, all of these amazing communities, and to experience such insanity, including that there is not enough water, and that actually one of the main reasons there's not enough water is the shutdown of the small water cycle, what's called the biotic pump. Evapotranspiration, the recirculation of water from vegetation, which the shutdown of small water cycles is what creates deserts. When we talked to a guy named Tom, an archaeologist who works with the Apache Nation, who lives in Superior, Arizona, he said that the Hohokam people have lived with canal-supported agriculture for 4,000 years in the Valley of the Sun, which is where Phoenix is today. So that harsh desert was actually lush riparian wetlands, grasslands, and forest until about 800 years ago. Now, there's a complex story about the Anasazi and climate change and land management issues, and you can't reduce it to a single cause. But humans had long-term settlements in that desert for 4,000 years. And so just to give you a feel for how complex this is. So I'm going to stop because I just did a whirlwind. I want to invite Penny and Benji to share any testimonials they'd like to give, recognizing we've been going for a long time and that we might all be full. Like there's a lot here. But I just want to, before I pass it to them, I just want to make a note that I don't think anyone else on Earth is thinking about, let alone trying to take action on regeneration at this scale. But I think you can see from this whirlwind tour, we cannot regenerate any of these landscapes without changing this machine metaphor at the larger system scale and dismantling that system, which means the collapse of human population centers, agricultural systems. They're so deeply entrenched in each other. So just to tell you how intractable water management in the Colorado is, I hope you all can feel that, those of you who didn't know about the Colorado before. So there, I'll stop. Penny or Benji, if there's anything you'd like to add. Or another time, maybe. No pressure.
It's like writing a huge novel and saying, is there anything else you want to add in there? That was a big story. I'll just be really brief. I'll just say that I wrote about this too, so it might not be news. Maybe it is to somebody, but I was just so encouraged in conversations with people that they could sort of balance this sense of impossibility, looking at just the deep entrenchment in terms of infrastructure and politics. Yet getting into a room together, seeing each other, recognizing that we're all ready to enter a new story. And we can find our places in the small water cycles. We can find our places like Kaufman Ranch, these community land trusts that can exist anyway. And the narrative of regenerating the Colorado River can sort of be incubated, nurtured, and grow in parallel to these obscene structures that we'll probably be seeing the rest of our lifetime. But hey, who knows? And I'll just leave it at that. So thank you for letting me share. And thank you, Joe.
Yeah, Penny, would you like to share?
Sure, I'll say just a little bit. I'm all bundled up because it's like 50 degrees in this house that I'm in in Boulder. Um, just a tiny bit because that was long and we're tired, I think. But I would just add along sort of a personal or spiritual line for myself. Making the river primary in this whole journey was quite a change in it's like a complete change in orientation. And it's really, really profound as we traveled with the river. Then we come into communities, and then the communities were organizing. Instead of it's like this change of organizing around the water, organizing around the watershed. The watershed is organizing the people. So the people were being organized by the river, and the landscapes being formed by the river. And um, it's it was such a profound experience that now it's like the water is a connector, and I could feel the connection all the way through the landscapes, through each landscape, all connected to each other through the water. And now I can feel the interconnection of everything on a deeper level, it's just embodied, just bees with the flowers being interconnected as one thing. And it's so profound to change the orientation, to letting the land and the water organize us. So it's incredible.
Yeah, so I don't know if there are any questions or comments, granting that I basically just like walked you through an encyclopedia in a way. But are there any questions or comments or reflections that anyone would like to share?
I've got one
Yeah, come on in.
comment. Thank you so much, Joe and Annie and Benji, for that awesome trek. I just wanted to say up in the headwaters that the Coyote Valley, where the Utes held out because it was over the mountain, and so last refuge, it's by Grand Lake, and it was full of beaver dams. And we forget how many beaver there were throughout the Rocky Mountain region, which really did affect the water systems, and when they were really healthy and regenerative and soil making, and all of the keystone species that beavers were. But they started to rip out the beaver dams by 1820. Most of them were gone because they couldn't navigate anything with the beaver dams. They couldn't put their canoes or boats or whatever, and that they wanted to grow hay and grass. So it goes back that far to 1820. And the forests that burned there, it looks like they're regenerating really fast, but they're not going to come back anywhere near what they were. They won't. The Front Range here, Boulder, Colorado, will never have the same forests that burned just locally. We're going to have forests, pinyon pine forest, and forests with Albuquerque's trees, not what was indigenous here. So nature's resilient. It'll come back, but it's a total change. And the machine is going to collapse. It's in its collapse stages. And how can we have those little refugees? So little, like that ranch, and whether it's 3 acres or 3,000, and to rebuild and to do what the beaver do. So yay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. On to you, Mehdi.
Joe, I want to thank you. It's a while since I've been able to be in a room with you because of other priorities, but I want you to imagine a 4-year-old girl in the year 1950 sitting in her father's study in a feudal village in England, seeing for the first time photographs of the Grand Canyon, and saying, when I grow up, I'm going to live in that country. And she didn't know then that she was going to be going tonight to a Malibu Creek restoration project, a watershed workshop where people are coming together to really focus on Malibu Creek. It's a tiny, tiny watershed, but we're going to be getting rid of the Ringe Dam after a 40-year advocacy program led by California Trout. We're going to be working together on how to restore this watershed. And I really believe everything that Benji says, that John says, and that you inspire, you and Penny and Benji have inspired by your journey. We can turn the current. It may not happen in our lifetime, but we can lay the groundwork for it to happen and for us to live in harmony again with those people who've been there for 4,000 years. We can do it for another 4,000. Thank you.
I'm just smiling at the thought of that little 4-year-old girl. I remember when I was like 9 or 10 and I saw the California redwoods. I was like, what are those? Like, oh my God, like there's just these places on earth that are like this. And the Grand Canyon is one of them. Yeah, I think one thing I maybe just to bring us to a close is to share the principal metaphor for our journey was that we are spirit walkers. And we told this to people everywhere we went. So we are spirit walkers. We're going to walk in a different reality through this landscape and invite people into a dream world with us, where we dream of regenerating the Colorado River. And this is what I said at the beginning of those talks, where people thought I was nuts, until we walked through the planetary boundaries. You know, like if for those of you who've seen the kinds of talks that we gave in Toronto and in the Great Lakes, I modified that talk for the different places we went. And by the time we got to looking at the continental and subcontinental scale of saying, look, you could have a bioregional learning center in the headwaters, and you could have one in Mexicali, and you could send children from Mexico can go to the headwaters. The children in Mexico don't know their water comes from the snow. And those children up there in the snow don't know that their water does not ever get to the sea anymore. And by the way, the Sea of Cortez had one of the most amazing deltas on earth. Like when you hear the stories of it, it's like reading the story of, you know, the Garden of Eden or something in Baja California. And so just like for the children to dream of each other's, for those children in Mexico to dream of the mountains, and for those children of the mountains to dream of the sea, because we actually bring them to each other, passing through Cortez, of course. Yeah, like we bring them to, just making a joke for Heidi. You know, we bring them to each other. That this is doable. Like we can organize for children to do this. I have a call starting in a half an hour with the members of Pro Social World about the work they're doing in Latin America, where we've agreed we're going to organize around children as the transformational anchor to spread regenerative practices through Latin America through the network of community foundations that I'm involved with helping to build. I'm indirectly involved with, but that I'm part of the network that's building it. And the idea is the children. So we're thinking of bilingual learning, Spanish and English between Mexico and Colorado, and then start to sprinkle in indigenous culture and indigenous language. Just because, you know, we start with what's more readily available to do and then build from there. And at the same time, when I sent a little audio clip of a Kukapa teacher in Mexicali saying she took her children, her school children, to the Delta to pick up trash. And she told this incredible story of what happened to those children. And I shared that with one of the women here in Barichara, Emilce, who teaches indigenous mythology through theater to children about the Northern Andes cosmovision. And her immediate thing was, we need to create video exchanges between those kids in Mexicali and the kids here. And I'm like, done, let's do it. Yeah. So it's just like, you know, you get a couple of excited teachers, doesn't take much to get this kind of thing started. And so the way I feel is I feel that machine that is like, an iron lung pumping life into and out of the Colorado Basin is going to die soon. And the rejuvenation of the landscapes will start to happen naturally, but slowly, because Hoover Dam is a little bit too big to get rid of by natural erosion forces very quickly. It's actually overbuilt fivefold. It's 5 times as much concrete as they needed to hold the water, because it was the first structure of its size ever built. But just to say, the dream of regeneration is alive in many people now, and I think it'll soon be in many more. So I hope you all can feel the power of the way we're evolving the bioregional activation process. We certainly do. We think that Cascadia is going to be kind of incredible. We're already feeling into, with Brian and Susan, maybe going back to the greater Takaranto area in January. That we're exploring that. Rather, they're exploring it. They have capacity to organize it. But we may end up back in Preston's neck of the woods, close enough we could maybe visit Roberta. We don't know. But so we just visit you.
What's the time frame there, Joe?
End of January.
January.
End of
Oh,
January.
end of January. End of
Yeah.
January? Oh.
Yeah, because
Oh, but-
the time to go to Southern Ontario is obviously January.
And the mountains of Maine.
Yeah, I mean, it's really winter here, and winter is beautiful in Maine. There's no question about it, and it's a dominant season. There's some power in that, and people generally are not as busy with a million other things in the winter. There's definitely some. So I had not thought of it being winter though. So let's have to rethink that.
No, quite all right. Well,
Yeah.
I hope that my little family photo slideshow was a nice way to feel how Penny and Benji and I spent a couple weeks of our time. Albert spent a few days of that time with us.
Yeah.
All of the images of the Western landscapes, that was my old stomping grounds for my growing up years. So, and the Mojave Desert, especially where my grandma lived, amazing transformative place of my youth. So I really enjoyed everything. Well, I didn't enjoy the bad news of your talk, but I enjoyed seeing your journey very, very much.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of fun that we're ending with you talking about time with your grandmother as a kid and just looking at Albert, who grew up in those landscapes too. Not very far down in Tijuana.
Amazing connections through this school. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, and onward.
Onward we
Yeah.
go. Thank you, everybody.
Onwards. See
Yeah.
ya.
Bye-bye.
I want to do something cartoonish for Albert, like Scooby-Doo.
Oh.
Like, woo! Because we're back to being cartoons. That's what he said in Mexicali. He's like, oh, you're not cartoons.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea you were real in meat space, like actually
Meat space.
tangible.
Meat space.
In
Oh,
what
man.
space?
Meat
Meat.
space.
Meat space. Oh God.
Well, I
I
can't wait to
mean-
see you again in meat space, Albert.
Yeah, let's go for birria.
Let's do it.
Awesome.
That'll get me there.
We
All
can
right.
start.
Well, talk to you all guys. Talk to you all soon. Thank you everyone
Bye-bye.
for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Have fun.